So this is a video responding to, got my notes, the new book by Jonathan Cahn. This author calls himself a rabbi, which means teacher. Um, I have not read The Dragon's Prophecy, I believe is what it's called, the new book. However, I did read Harbinger, which was his first big hit. I don't know if it was his first book or not. And I have seen the interviews with him explaining his new book. And so I wanted, and so through those interviews, I can tell that this new book is using the same technique as his first book. He's had several since then, Harbinger 2 and some more. He is using a trick, and it's deceptive and it's wrong. A magician uses this trick, but the magician does it for entertainment purposes. He tells you he's going to trick you, then he tricks you, and it's entertaining. This is not entertaining because this is not being presented as a trick. This is being presented as truth. And that's why it's truly deceptive and why it's truly wrong. And the Bible warns against this. First, let me tell you the trick, and then let me show you Jonathan Cahn using it. The trick is a good example of the trick in magic is when you have the rings, the magic rings trick, where you have these solid brass or solid metal rings. And there's 4 of them usually. And you have 2 of these rings are solid rings and they're connected. Okay. And then one of these rings is a solid ring by itself. The 4th ring is a trick ring. It comes apart. So what the magician will do is he will tell you that these are all solid rings. And he will take the 2 rings that are connected and he'll give them to the audience to pass around, to have several people check them and to make sure that they're solid rings with no tricks to them. The 2nd ring, which is a solid ring, he'll also give to the audience and have them pass it around, making sure he tells them to pass it around and that several people get to touch it. The last ring, the trick ring, he gives to a plant in the audience who is a trusted individual who he gives the trick ring to, who then spends a lot of time investigating this ring and basically just hoarding the ring so that nobody else can look at it. Then he takes the rings up and he takes through some sleight of hand, he makes it look like all the rings are disconnected by replacing one of the connected rings with the solid ring. But anyway, then he taps them together and he drops the 2 rings that are connected. Okay. Then he taps them together again and he actually connects the the trick ring with the 2 connected rings. And then he connects the one real ring, the single ring by itself, to the trick ring. Therefore, all 4 rings are connected. Okay. So by doing this, he gives you 3 things, and the 2 connected rings and the single solid ring that you can check out that are verifiable, that are, for lack of a better word, facts. Okay. But the trick is the connection. The connection is fake. The connection is the trick. Okay. This is what Jonathan Cahn does when he starts quoting things in the Bible. And let me give you an example. This is just from the video. I'll link the video in the bottom. There were several links out there because he's made the rounds promoting his book. This is the one I watched that was recommended that I watch, that he sort of talks about the book and what's in the book and all that. And he talks about how the word Hamas is an acronym. And of course, it's in Arabic, but in English, it just means the Islamic Brotherhood, or the Islamic Military Brotherhood, something to that effect. And it's an acronym that means that. It's also an Arabic word that means strength. Then he says, it's also in the Bible. This may shock you. He says this in all the interviews that I've seen. He says, this may shock you. It may shock you to learn that Hamas is in the Bible. Yes, Hamas is in the Old Testament. The Hebrew word Hamas meant violence. And he points out, it's Genesis. I wrote it down, I thought. I guess I didn't. I think it's Genesis 1:17. No, that can't be right. Oh, well. In Genesis, it does say the world became filled with violence. And this is right before the, it can't be 1:17. Maybe it's 17. I don't know. But I could look it up real quick for you. I thought I wrote it down, but I guess I didn't. So he says, let me just look this up real quick. Okay, Genesis 6:11. Genesis 6:11. And that word there that is translated in English to violence is the Hebrew word, well, it's actually the Hebrew word Hamas. It's pronounced a little differently than Hamas, but nevertheless, it sounds like the same word. And then he says, this is the Bible telling us that Hamas is going to fill the world with violence. Now, did you see the trick? He gave you 3 rings you could check out. You could look to see if he's telling you the truth, that Hamas is an acronym. It is. You can look to see if Hamas is an Arabic word, meaning strength. I think it's strength. Strength. Or toughness. It is. You can look in the Old Testament. You can look in your Blue Letter Bible at Genesis. And it's not the only place this word appears, by the way. And it's translated 39 times as violence. It's translated a little differently in other places, but it's all generally the same: violence or struggle or fight. But 39 times in the King James is translated as violence. Okay, you can check that out. There's 3 rings for you to examine. Okay. The trick is the connection. There's no connection between these 3 things. Okay. And I can prove it to you. I mean, you can say, well, how do you know? I mean, the Bible could be saying this. Is it just a coincidence that the word Hamas means violence in the Old Testament is not about Hamas. We can look. We can check this out. John 5:46. I'm going to switch over here so that I can pull these scriptures up. Please pull these scriptures up yourself and check them out. So John 5:46. John 5. Got to put a space between John and 5:46. Okay. He's talking to the Jews here, and he says, you didn't believe Moses, starting in verse 45. Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, even Moses, in whom you trust. Moses wrote the law. Okay. For if you had believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me. Okay. So Moses wrote in Genesis. When Moses was writing, he was writing about Jesus. Okay. The whole, and I'm not talking about that word violence. I'm talking about the whole Old Testament was written for a purpose. And the purpose of the Old Testament was not to explain what we're going through today. It was not to predict that there would be groups in 2024 that would be causing violence and what those groups were going to be called or anything like that. It is the purpose of the Old Testament, we're told by Jesus, is to tell of him. This isn't the only place. Let's look in Luke. Luke 24:27. Luke 24:27. And beginning at Moses, Jesus, this is Jesus back up here a minute so you can see it in context. Please go read these in their full context. Jesus speaking, he says, "And then he said to them, O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things?" I'm sorry, this is not Jesus speaking. Let me back up, get my facts straight. Oh, yes, it is. Okay. I was wondering why he was speaking to him in a third person. This is Jesus speaking on the road to Emmaus. Okay, but he's hidden himself from the disciples that he's walking with. He hasn't revealed himself as Jesus to them, so that's why it speaks a little weird, strangely here instead of saying I. Then he said to them, "O fools, slow of heart to believe the prophets have spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things?" He's talking about this is after his death and resurrection, so that's what he's referring to. And in verse 27, he says, "And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." Okay, so he's taking all of the Old Testament and he's relating all of the Old Testament and teaching them that the Old Testament, all the Moses wrote and all that the prophets wrote were about him, were about the fulfillment of the law. The Old Testament is about Jesus. There's a wonderful series by Mike Winger. I suggest you look it up, and it's called Jesus in the Old Testament, and it walks through how the temple reflects what Christ has done, how the sacrifices reflect what Christ has done, how the feasts reflect what Christ has done, what happened to Israel through their captivity in Egypt and through their deliverance into the Promised Land is about what Christ has done. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to study the Old Testament in light of the New Testament. Let's look again. Let's keep going here. John chapter 14, verse 6. Jesus said unto them, "I am the truth, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but through me." Jesus is the truth. There's no hidden truths out there that Jesus has not revealed. He has told us quite clearly and quite plainly all the mysteries. Paul walks through how these mysteries have been revealed, that the Gentiles have been included in the plan of salvation, and how the elect of God's chosen people have been chosen to share the good news of Jesus Christ to the rest of the world. That's why the Jews were initially chosen, to bless the unchosen, but they failed, and so now he has moved to the new covenant, where we are chosen. The Gentiles are chosen to bless unbelievers, and he talks about the Jews being able to be grafted back in. Jesus is the way. He is the truth, and he is the life. If you are studying the Bible and you are not studying about Jesus, then it's a red flag. I'm not saying you can't learn stuff about history from the Bible or about creation or the history maybe of Israel. There are things in there that you can learn, sure, but the purpose of the Bible is Jesus Christ. Let's look at again. Let's go back to Luke later in that same chapter. Let's look at Luke chapter 24, 44. "And he said to them," this is Jesus speaking to the disciples, "These are the words which I spoke unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled." Okay? All the prophecies must be fulfilled, "which were written in the law of Moses and in the prophets," and it even includes the Psalms, "and in the Psalms concerning me," concerning Jesus Christ. The last book in the Bible, which Jonathan Cahn likes to refer to quite a bit, in fact, this is where he gets the so-called prophecy of the dragon, which is about the army of the dragon, and that's the prophecy, by the way, spoiler alert. The prophecy of the dragon is that he has an army, okay? And this army, according to Jonathan Cahn, is Hamas, the Palestinians, okay? That's you don't have to read the book. There's the book. let's look at, but the Bible is not does not tell us anything about this army. The purpose of Revelation is not to teach us about this army. The purpose of Revelation is to teach us about, that's right, Jesus Christ. He is, in fact, the book is called, the very first verse, Revelation 1:1, is the revelation of Jesus Christ. This is the revelation of Jesus Christ, and it is about Jesus Christ. Now, this gets to a little personal about Jonathan Cahn, and I'm sorry, but it's just the truth. Jonathan Cahn is in Revelation. Now, not him personally, but he is. But what he is doing is talked about in Revelation. Revelation 1:14, I believe, is where it's at. No, that's not where it's at. That's in the messages to the seven churches. I wrote down, 2:14. Sorry, what did I say, 1:14? 2:14. There we go. 2:14. This is in his letter to Pergam now. In Revelation, Jesus addresses 7 letters to 7 churches. And one of those churches was the church at Pergamum. And in this letter, he gives them some compliments. And at the end, he says, for 14, but I have a few things against you, because thou hast there them that hold to the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit fornication. Now, I'm not saying Jonathan Cahn is directly or literally causing people to sacrifice things to idols, but I do think that when you buy his book, you are paying a prophet for a prophecy, and that is the error of Balaam. I wouldn't go so far to accuse my brothers and sisters who have read this book and even fallen for the trick of Jonathan Cahn. He does this trick over and over again in the Harbinger, and I've seen it in him when he's talking about. We'll go over another one here in a minute. When he talks about his new book, it's the same trick over and over again, giving you some things you can verify and then making a connection that is false, that is a trick. That's the trick. Okay, let's go back to this. To be clear, he does claim to be a prophet. In this video that I watched, which is linked below in the comments, he clearly says that he prophesied the night before, on October 6th, 2023, he prophesied the October 7th attack on Israel. He said that he prophesied that there would be an attack on Israel, that would happen in 2023, that it would happen in October, that it would happen on a Sabbath day, and that it would happen on a Hebrew holy day. He says he taught this. I don't know who he taught it to, but he says he taught this on the Friday night of October the 6th. That's his claim. You can watch it below. That's what he says. Okay, so he claims to be a prophet. The problem with that is there is, first of all, this does not match prophecies given in the Old Testament. Prophecies a prophet gives a prophecy, especially if it's a judgment prophecy, in order to obtain repentance. That's the purpose of the prophecy. Well, twofold purpose is to render judgment, maybe. I don't know what order you want to put these in, but to render judgment in order to obtain repentance. That's the purpose of the prophecy. And perhaps to show that that God is the author of what is taking place when the judgment is fulfilled. It might be another purpose that you can point to in the prophecies. However, giving prophecies for profit is strictly forbidden. That is the error of Balaam, and we can look. By the way, I go to a very small church with like 30 or 40 people, in attendance, and we record our messages for those who can't come to watch. The church, every church I've been a part of, no matter how small, they record their messages. Okay, if he really did make this prophecy in a teaching on that October 6th, where is it? Where is this prophecy? Or even if he didn't record it, where are these people he taught this to on October 6th? Where's their testimony? Yes, he said this. Yes, he said this. There's none of that on the internet. There's no receipts that he made this prophecy. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm just saying there's no receipts. Furthermore, this is not biblical prophecy because it doesn't contain repentance and it doesn't contain the other oracles that are the other ordinances, I'm sorry, that would make it a biblical prophecy. In other words, when you're saying something in a prophetic manner and you're issuing a judgment in the Old Testament, the purpose of predicting the future was to prove that the prophecy was true. What he is doing is saying, I predicted something in the past. I'm telling you, I predicted something in the past so that you'll believe me now when I say this. And that's not the way biblical prophecy works. But let's look at what the Bible actually says. So let's look at 2 Peter 2:15. 2 Peter 2:15. Let me back up here for a minute. These cursed, he's talking about, I guess going to 14. These people have eyes for adultery. They cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls. It means tricking people. That means deceiving people. Okay. On an heart that they have exercised with covetous, in other words, coveting practices, cursed children, which have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Basor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. In other words, he prophesied for money. Now we can see that Balaam is mentioned in the Old Testament. It's in Numbers, which I think is interesting. So let's just go there. Numbers 22. Here we go. Sorry, I didn't finish reading. Hold on. We don't need to go to Numbers 22. The story is long. I don't want to get into it, but Balaam was hired by a king for money to prophesy against the Israelites. And on his way there to do that, his donkey got in the way. This is the King James, so you'll have to pardon some of the old brutal language, but this is what it says. Let me reread 15 and then put 16 with it. Which have forsaken the right way, and they are gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Basor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness, but was rebuked for his iniquity. The dumb ass, speaking with a man's voice, forbade the madness of the prophet. On his way to the king, his donkey started talking to him, telling him he can't go on. He can't go on. He can't do this. The donkey wasn't going to be part of it. He wasn't going to go. Yes, the donkey was talking. And here he is called a dumbass for speaking with a man's voice to forbade, the madness of the prophet. And I'm happy to be the dumbass that stands up against Jonathan Cahn and says, no, you're not a prophet. The Lord didn't speak to you because the Lord has already spoken in his word. And when the Lord does speak, he speaks of his son. He speaks of the way of righteousness. And that is not what you are saying. So I'm glad to be the dumbass. Okay. A little joke there for you. All right. So let me get into the other. This is the other thing that he said about his book. He talked about the word Philistine. And he talked about the fact that the Gaza Strip didn't exist until 1948, which is the same time that the Israel came into existence. And that the people, the Palestinians, is the same word for Palestine, or Palestinians. In fact, it's pronounced the same way. Well, this is while these things are verifiable, these are your solid rings, so to speak. It's also it's layering. You're layering some things, and you're uh, the reason. Okay, when 1948 happened, there was actually a mixture of people, but due to conflict and then war raged, and then yes, these people got a lot of the people that were in um, Israel proper at the time fled to this area of the Gaza Strip, which is the old area of the Philistines, right? Yes, the city states of the Philistines, which is Gaza and these other ancient towns, which are now cities. But why? Because they belong to the Philistines. Because Israel wasn't trying to possess them. They were like, go over there, right? Um, so I brought up all of this to say that just because you can't just take some patterns of history and say, and then say, well, because of that, you have to believe my prophecy that this then is the army of Satan. This is the army of the dragon, the Palestinians. You know, what help is that? When in the New Testament it teaches that there is no Jew, there is no Hebrew, there is no Palestinian, there is no Christian. I mean, there is Christian. I messed that up. But you get my point, is that these people, Jesus Christ died for these people. Jesus Christ died for their sins just as much as he died for our sins. Just because they're Palestinians does not mean they don't need the gospel. And to paint them as the army of the dragon is not promoting peace. It is not going to win them over to Christ, which is our commission. Our commission is not to point out the army of Satan. Our mission is not to pick a people who are suffering in a war right now at the hands of Hamas, by the way. They're suffering because of Hamas, because Hamas doesn't give a rip about them. Okay, Hamas has an agenda, and they'll sacrifice the Palestinian people to get their agenda. They're not pro-Palestinian. Anyway, that's a whole nother. Sorry. The point is that's not our job. Our job is not to point out even Hamas itself as the army of Satan. Yes, they're destructive. Yes, they have an evil agenda, but they themselves, Jesus Christ died for them. Paul says he was the chief sinner because he was a Pharisee. We can't lose sight of that, and we can't just start calling people and labeling them the devil's army. That's not what we're called to do as Christians. We're called to reach them for Christ. We're called to feed them. They're our enemies. We're called to pray for them. They're not even our enemies. They're Israel's enemies. But even if they were our enemies, we're supposed to pray for them, feed them, look after them, want the best for them. Why? So that they will see the love of Christ in us. And that's why I think this book is evil. I think this book is wrong. You know, you can take coincidences about the Kennedy assassination and the Lincoln assassination, you know, and you can go crazy. There's a lot there. Go look it up. There's a lot of coincidences, and they're verifiable. A lot of them. Some of them aren't, but a lot of them are verifiable. I mean, just look at the fact that Kennedy was uh, uh, succeeded by. They were both succeeded by a man named Johnson. They were both succeeded by Democrats. Their mothers both had the same both Johnsons' mothers had the same name. And then there's some things about the years. They were both born in the same last two digits of the year, and they were both elected the last two digits of the year. There's a bunch of stuff like that. But just because you can point out these coincidences doesn't mean that the South is Satan's army, because it's trying to destroy the federal government, because both killers were from the South. I mean, it's the same. I mean, that is the same connection that he's making. And obviously, it's not a fair one. Obviously, it's not a true one. You can make the same connection with the way words sound, Jonathan Cahn, and a con artist. Is that a coincidence? Yes.